historically accurate the story would be. Would it only reflect the invasion and date and place alone, or would its influences go even further than that? To find out, let's take a look at the real history of Ghost of Tsushima. On the evening of November 4th, 1274, a fleet of Mongol invaders was spotted in the sea near Tsushima Island. This gave enough time for So Sukekuni, the Jitodai, or Deputy Jito, of Tsushima, to organize a defense. Alongside 80 mounted samurai and their followers, Sukekuni took position on the beach at Komoda. He brought an interpreter with him to try and understand the intentions of the Mongols, but they had no desire to negotiate, immediately attacking with arrows as over 1,000 Mongol warriors reached the land. In Ghost of Tsushima, the island's Jito, Lord Shimura, sets up a defense at Komoda Beach with the 5 samurai clans, making up a total of 80 mounted samurai. Shimura sends his best warrior, Lord Harunobu Adachi, to confront the Mongols and demand to fight their best warrior, but Khotan Khan responds by setting him on fire and beheading him, immediately prompting the battle to begin. In real life, more than half of Sukekuni's followers died at the beach, and he led a band towards the Mongol forces, where he ultimately fell. In the game, most of Tsushima's samurai die at the beach, and Lord Shimura is captured by the Mongols. Shimura's nephew, Jin Sakai, narrowly escapes death, and sets out to save his uncle. Before Sukekuni died, he sent 2 men, Kotaro and Hijiro, to slip past the Mongol ships and take a message to Dazaifu, on the Japanese mainland, that the war had started. In the game, Shimura and Jin send 2 samurai, Kotaro and Jiro, along with a pirate named Goro, to sail past the Mongol armada and send a message to the mainland, requesting additional samurai warriors. Both in real life and the game, the Mongols spent several days capturing the island of Tsushima, setting fire to nearby buildings and killing most of the inhabitants. In real life, they moved on from the island to the nearby Iki, and eventually to mainland Japan, where they are suspected to have been pushed down by a large storm. In the game, they capture most of the island and plan to head towards the mainland, but are ultimately defeated by the samurai and shogun in the midst of a large storm. The initial battle between the Mongols and Japanese was the first time their contrasting fighting tactics had really been documented. In the game, the primary weapon of the samurai is the katana, but the word katana wasn't commonly used for battle weapons for about another 200 years. In the real invasion, tachi swords were actually used against the Mongols. In fact, it was during these invasions that the tachi was discovered to be inconvenient, as the thick and heavy blade made it difficult to find swords in close combat, and its lack of flexibility made it easy to break or chip. In the game, Jin also has a tentoe along his katana, a small sword that he uses for particularly close combat. This was a common companion piece of the tachi for the samurai at the time. Despite all this talk of swords, however, the main weapon of the samurai during the invasion was actually the bow, which is highly prevalent in the game but still feels secondary to the katana, although you can understand why, considering how enjoyable the katana actually feels to use. The characters in the game use the bow correctly too, holding it above their head and moving their hands apart as they bring the bow down and draw the string back. One interesting weapon used in the game by Jin is that of a smoke bomb. What's interesting is that the use of the weapon may actually be historically accurate, though likely from the wrong side of the invasion. Some archaeological evidence suggests that pottery bombs were used by the Mongols off the coast of Japan, one of the earliest examples of gunpowder warfare. If not during this invasion, then certainly during the one 7 years later. Speaking of gunpowder warfare, the Mongols are suspected to have used cannons during the invasion, based on the mentions of a bell-shaped weapon that shot thousands of iron balls and made the sound of a thunderclap. The in-game Mongols use cannons too, in this instance to burn down and destroy several towns and strongholds across the island of Tsushima. Another weapon that the game flips between nations is that of poison. In the game, Jin learns how to make poison from his caretaker, Yurika, by using wolfsbane. After Jin uses it to poison a life, the Khan learns how to recreate it and uses it to kill people of Tsushima. In real life, however, the Mongols brought their own poison-tipped arrows to the interior, crafted using a plant named Akaka, also known as wolfsbane. They had other methods for gathering poison too, such as extracting it from the poison of the snake. They had other methods for gathering poison too, such as extracting it directly from the snake. Although the primary events behind the game's story are fairly close to real life, one of the main points of narrative mention in the game may actually be a historical inaccuracy. In Ghost of Tsushima, the samurai have a code to honor their enemy in battle, face them directly, and treat them how they wish to be treated. It's a great point of tension for Jin, as he feels the need to use other tactics in order to defeat the Mongol threat and save the Japanese people. He is met with discontent at every step by his uncle, who is adamant about following the traditional samurai code and defeating their enemy the honorable way. While this conflict is incredibly effective in the narrative, it doesn't really have historical precedence. The tenet of honor is not known to have been introduced to the samurai code, known as the Bushido, until at least the 14th century. The samurai of the 13th century didn't typically discuss the same morals of modern samurai, besides occasionally feelings of mercy, and instead focused on fearlessness toward their opponent in battle to protect their land and overwhelm the enemy. In 1900, Japanese author Nitobe Inazo wrote of the 8 virtues of Bushido, one of which concerns the need to treat one's enemies with honor. More specifically, it notes that true warriors need not be cruel, nor should they need to prove their strength, but that they become respected by the way in which they deal with others. However, these virtues are not necessarily representative of all Bushido throughout history, having been published over 600 years after the Battle of Tsushima, so the developers may have taken some creative liberties when implementing this code of honor in the game. Outside of the main story, there are plenty of other elements of the game inspired by or based on real historical objects or events. Across the island of Tsushima, Jin can discover 49 shrines dedicated to Inari, the kami or deity of agriculture and plenty. In the game, the shrines are represented by foxes, both real and in statue form. These shrines actually exist in real life too. The development of Inari shrines began in the 9th century, also intended to worship the deity Inari, who is more widely known to be the kami of foxes, fertility, tea, rice, sake, agriculture, industry, and general prosperity and success. And, like the game, the entrances of these shrines are typically marked by images of foxes. Considering the size of the island, it's unlikely that there were or are 49 of these shrines on Tsushima, but they make for a fun collectible. Another collectible is a Sashimono banner. In the game, these are represented as collectible banners originally worn by members of Tsushima's great clans. They work similarly in real life too, historically meant to be worn by soldiers in feudal Japan for easier identification during battle. They became most significant in the Sengoku period, the almost 150-year period in Japan of near constant war from the 15th to 17th century. The banners were certainly used during the First Mongol invasion as well. An interesting set of collectibles in the game are the singing crickets. They're said to be an early sign of autumn, prized for their singing and often caught to be kept in small cages. And this is largely true. Crickets were the primary symbols of autumn and were described as poetic and musical as early as the 10th century. As for keeping them in cages, there's pretty clear evidence that this was the case in China around the 8th century, so it's fairly feasible that such a sport had made its way to Japan by the 13th century. Full-time cricket trade didn't emerge as an occupation until the 17th century, however, and it largely disappeared after the 19th century. Interestingly, one of my favourite collectibles in the game is actually somewhat historically inaccurate.
Stay back!
Throughout the island, Jin discovers locations where he can compose haikus, which are 3-line poems with a syllable pattern of 5-7-5. However, at the time, the closest thing to a haiku was fluid hokku. It uses the same syllable pattern, but only existed as the opening stanza of a different type of poem, a renga, which would consist of one poet writing a hokku of 5-7-5, and then a different poet writing another 2-line stanza of 7-7. The hokku didn't begin to appear as an independent poem until the 17th century, and it wasn't until the late 19th century that their name was changed to haiku. So while haikus technically did exist in 1274, they were written in a very different method than they appear in the game.
And if you can avenge him,
Sucker Punch clearly put a lot of work into creating the world of Ghost of Tsushima, and this is largely reflected in Japan, both of which began with an attack on the island of Tsushima, are a significant event in Japanese and Mongol history, and Sucker Punch has portrayed it beautifully and respectfully within the game. Even more than this, though, is the studio's work at crafting a world full of old Japanese traditions that are generally pretty historically accurate. And when they're not, it's usually only because of the time period. Everything mentioned is historically significant to Japan in some way. Instead of being as nitpicky as I am and making a one-to-one copy of Tsushima in 1274, the developers handpicked some of the best Japanese traditions from history and represented them beautifully. And that, among many other things, is one of the main reasons that I love Ghost of Tsushima.
Master Izo's home. The sculptor's tools must be here.
Recently, SPM has found a resurgence in popularity due to TikTok trends. But do these Gen Z teenagers know that SPM is a convicted jester currently serving 45 years after getting caught pounding off in a hotel room with two 14-year-olds and putting a 13-year-old pregnant at the age of 22. This man has a child titillation record that would make Roman Polanski sick. SPM still gets 1.6 million Spotify plays per month after being locked up for over 21 years. But what if I told you he was way worse than expected? For those who don't know, SPM was an influential rapper in the late 90s and early 2000s, selling millions of records independently. He was actually signed to Universal in the year 2000. They were planning on putting a lot of money behind him to help him become a more commercial and mainstream rapper, but decided to step back since it became increasingly more likely that he would end up in prison. One of SPM's proteges was Baby Bash, and at first, Baby Bash said that SPM was innocent, but recently he's saying he doesn't know because SPM's paperwork has emerged.
Asked about like SPM and those questions regarding that. I think people assume that I'm like Mr. Dope House, like I was over, you know what I mean? Like I just know all the information and I was there every day. No, I wasn't around that. I mean, you gotta understand, I was doing music over there and working with everybody, but we were out hustling and people just think, oh, Baby Bash knows everything. No, I don't know everything. They asked me about the case. I'm like, look, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. If I did know, believe me, I'd make my fucking mark. And if anything happened like that, then he's the lowest piece of shit motherfucker. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And that's just how I feel about it. People always ask me, I don't know what he did. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, you know what I'm saying? So,
it was originally believed that he had a one-night stand with the stripper who turned out to be 13. In actuality, it wasn't a one-night stand. He had seen her multiple times and even dropped her off at a middle school.
and the plus is, if I were guilty of this, I would have took the 5 years. I'd have done 2.5 years and gone home. But they were trying to tell me that I had to say I was guilty for something I didn't do. Now, I did have a kid with an underage girl. She lied about her age. I never dropped her off at no damn middle school. All this that they're talking about. That's all. You would have to be fucking crazy to be sitting there not giving a about getting an underage girl pregnant. That's suicide. Of course I thought she was of age.
Were you rapping at that time, or that was before you started rapping?
No, I never knew I was going to be no rapper. I was 22 years old smoking fly. I was out of my mind. I was smoking fly, selling bitches. And those who don't know what fly is, it's formaldehyde. But I will never, ever regret my beautiful baby boy. Anyway, the world knows you couldn't love me. I'm a fucking dog, you know what I'm saying? But I'm not the kind of dog with the state of Texas I want you to believe I am.
Around 7 women between the ages of 12 and 14 came forward and said that they had sexual relationships with Carlos Coy, more famously known as South Park Mexican. Sadly enough, SPM didn't take the trial seriously, showing up to court wearing baggy gym shorts and big t-shirts. The son he had with the 13-year-old was already 7 at this point, and the mom only wanted child support. She wasn't trying to get him arrested for statutory rape. SPM could have avoided prison if he simply provided for his son. She successfully sued him for $28,000 in the year 2000. Then 2 years later, he would get convicted, mainly for getting her pregnant. Carlos was only supposed to serve 5 years, and the jury agreed that he knew how young she was and that he had seen her multiple times. This wasn't an honest mistake. If it was, he would have gotten a lighter sentence. This is a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He is undoubtedly attracted to children. To think he could actually beat this case when the mom is 20 and the kid is 7, proving without a doubt that he had sex with a 13-year-old. Before prison, SPM had a rough, mean, ruthless persona, and after being convicted, he talks in a higher-pitched voice, trying to seem as innocent as possible. Carlos still claims this whole thing has been a conspiracy against him, and that all his accusers are lying.
Time now passes in a state prison for Carlos Coy. He has served 6 of 45 years and sings a different song.
Do you know what it is to kiss your babies through a window? See your whole life pass through a window.
Carlos insists he was innocent of molesting his daughter's 9-year-old friend. Paternity tests do prove he fathered a child with a 14-year-old girl in a separate case.
Yeah, they say all publicity is good publicity, but I think in this one matter...
And there's more to this case that people don't know. Multiple middle school age girls have told detailed stories about their encounters with Coy. Some of their parents even confirmed the relationship. 45 years seems like a lot at first, but then you remember he had 7 total accusers. His excuse that he mistaked a middle schooler for an adult might work once, but not 9 times. Police Department investigator Heidi Ruiz was quoted saying, "He's guilty. He's more guilty than any suspect I've ever worked with before." The youngest victim Carlos had was 9 years old. She was a friend of his daughter who was spending the night on Labor Day weekend. The 2 girls were playing cops and robbers and entertained themselves using a Barbie CD-ROM. Later in the night, the 2 girls were channel surfing, and Carlos came in the room wearing boxers and a t-shirt. He would put on Texas Chainsaw Massacre while touching his daughter's friend inappropriately. The 2 girls would be put to bed, and the 9-year-old friend noticed Carlos by the doorway. He reached over his sleeping daughter and reached his hand under her friend's panties. She was pretending to be asleep, hoping he'd go away, but he would lick her vagina for a full 5 minutes. She didn't feel well after that and called her mom. She arranged a ride home, and Carlos was the driver. He told her not to tell anyone what he did, that she's a great dancer. He was going to open up a dance studio for her and make her a big star. Then he would buy her and her family anything they wanted. The little girl would have nightmares about what happened and eventually told her mom. According to Baby Bash, the mom tried to extort SPM for $20,000 or else they would go to the police.
Physically and mentally and emotional. She was very, very hard time.
Carlos laughed about it and hung up the phone. Supposedly he had an intimate relationship with the girl's mom, which probably explains why she attempted to settle things before going to the police. Carlos would get arrested a few weeks later. He was able to bond out of jail, and his trial was scheduled for May 6, 2002. More proof that he's a complete idiot. On February 3, 2002, while awaiting trial for child molestation, he picked up 2 14-year-old fans and took them to a motel, where one of the girls claims to have had sex with them. Carlos had showed her softcore Cinemax films, and she later locked herself in the bathroom while Carlos had sex with another woman. Carlos would drop off the 14-year-olds miles away from their house. Even if they weren't underage, this would be seen as disrespectful and rude. They had to use a phone at a strip mall to catch a ride from their older sister. When confronted about how they ended up there, they were honest. There were also witnesses who spotted the young girls at the motel, and this was enough to get his bond revoked. The sentence isn't actually harsh at all. The courts knew that he impregnated a 13-year-old. This should be enough to scare him into not doing it again, but he would do it multiple times. Awaiting trial for molestation wasn't enough to stop him from having sex with a 14-year-old. And apparently he's eligible for parole next year, and this dude got married to a girl in her mid-20s while in prison. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he started doing the same stuff when he gets out. Carlos has never taken accountability. I'd have more respect for him if he just came out and said, I was a predator and I knowingly did these things. Admitting is the first step to recovery, just like with alcoholism, and he might not be granted parole if he keeps lying. And it's a shame because he made good music. In the mid-2000s, there was a Houston explosion, and his friend Baby Bash started getting mainstream recognition. SPM could have been a big part of that, but he decided that molesting children was more important than his career. Hopefully it's worth sitting in a box for over 20 years. Yeah, you fucked up. I'm out.
But one thing I've found over time is that sex offenders have one trait in common, and that is that they are all liars, and you are no exception to that rule. You have lied to your family, you have lied to this court, you have lied to this jury, you lied to your audience every time you go up there with your positive message, knowing that your life is not as it should be. You have spent this court's time, this jury's time, trying to explain, trying to discount, trying to excuse your conduct. There is no excuse for your conduct. You have testified to this jury. I guess you believe this. You are convinced that you are a victim of your own celebrity in this situation. That if you were a plumber or a doctor or a priest or anything else but a rapper, you wouldn't be in this situation. Well, the fact is that there is only one victim in this case, and it is a 9-year-old girl. Now, that is reality, and you need to deal with it. All people in this state, in this county, in this city, and in this courtroom are equal in the eyes of the law. You have received a fair trial, you have received due process, and the jury has spoken. And it's time for you to face the music. It is the order of this court that you be delivered to the Sheriff of Harris County and to the...
Come back and get credit for the work you put in at Purdue Global. With your experience and college credit, your degree may be up to 75% complete.
Life. You feel that such a person has a tremendous wealth and capacity, but there's no possibility of finding a means of realization. The poor usually has a great capacity to stimulate the content and to listen, so that it seems that he's going to implement them. But he never applies the concepts he has learned, for he's not grounded enough in reality. It is a trick which the poor performs. The realization that they should adapt to reality is an intellectual idea to them, which they fulfill in fantasy, but not in reality. Though it might seem simple, the poor is unable to cross the border from fantasy to action. The word human derives from the Latin word humus, which means earth. To be human is to be humble, down to earth, and grounded in earthly experience, which contains a rich source of nutrients that heals us. The poor is like Icarus, who in Greek mythology is warned about hubris and not to fly too close to the sun. However, he ignores this instruction and flies so close to the sun that his wings melt. He falls from the sky, plunges into the sea, and drowns. Jung writes, "The provisional life, where one does not exist really, they are only a spectator, so any experience is ghost-like, perfectly abstract, without a trace of realization." Jung tells the story of a 25-year-old girl who had an extreme case of provisional life, which led to her suicide. She proved to be absolutely inaccessible. She lived things, she did things, and she did not know what she was living. No matter how hard one tried, nothing touched her, because she had no relation to the world at all. A few months later, she shot herself. He writes, "I saw the corpse. She had shot herself through the heart of the street and had not lost consciousness for a minute or two. The expression on her face was completely altered. For a long time I stood watching her face and asked myself, what kind of expression is that? It was the most extraordinary, and to whom it was very important that it was black, but to whom one had finally proven that it was red. And it was as if she suddenly realized it was red. It was a look full of bewilderment and a sort of pleasant surprise. I saw what happened. At the moment when she shot herself, she understood what life was for the first time. Sometimes people have to injure themselves very badly in order to awaken to what life really is. This shows how deeply unconscious people often are. The inner world must complement the outer world, and vice versa. An over-reliance on the inner world, in which the ego cannot get out of Neverland, will make it impossible to advance into adulthood. As this becomes more and more of a crisis, the unconscious starts to seep in and threatens to overwhelm and drown the ego. Whatever one has within oneself, but does not live, grows against one. There are also children that become mature too early and grow up very quickly. The extreme opposite of the puer. These are neglected children. The hardships of life have forced them to become very realistic, independent, and disillusioned. You can generally tell from a bitter and falsely mature expression that something went wrong. Pushed out of the childhood world too soon, such people cannot love nor trust anybody. In that situation, life has no meaning, because they have lost the magical aspect of the eternal youth. They always feel not quite real, only half alive. In therapy, the analyst has the difficult task of guiding them back to their childish fantasies in order to deal with them correctly. The eternal child also contains many positive qualities, a spirituality which comes from close contact with the unconscious. The puer is agreeable, has the charm of youth, and starts invigorating and deep conversations. He appears as the divine child, who symbolizes newness, potential for growth, and hope for the future. Friedrich Nietzsche understood the importance of this. In fact, he considered the child to be the final metamorphosis of becoming who one is. He writes, "The child is innocence and forgetfulness, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelling wheel, a first motion, a sacred yes. The game of creating, my brothers, a sacred yes in life is needed." What is meant by the child is that which is born from the maturity of the adult. It is not a regression towards an infantile state of life, but a progression towards wholeness. We all have an inner child within us, even older people, who sometimes appear to return to the childlike state of innocence. The eternal youth is one who is immersed in the moment and filled with wonder and playfulness, giving way to pure creativity. He is a yes-sayer, the pinnacle of life affirmation. He brings the heavenly realm into his earthly existence. A passage from the Bible reads, "Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." As we grow older, we enter the world of the senex, which is Latin for old man. He too possesses positive and negative aspects. Positively, he is a balanced person who is grounded, patient, conscientious, risk-averse, and controlled. Here he appears as the archetype of the wise old man. The negative side of the senex is cynicism, rigidity, materialism, reluctance to change, and a lack of a sense of humor. The senex is the opposite of the puer archetype, though they must be seen as the opposite sides of the same coin. We recognize youth by knowing age. We become aware of aging by remembering how we were when young. Jung writes, "The puer shadow is the senex, associated with the god of color, discipline, control, responsible, rational, order. Conversely, the shadow of the senex is the puer, related to Dionysus, unbounded, instinct, disorder, intoxication, whimsy. The puer dreams big, the senex works hard. The ratio of one to the other varies from person to person. Both archetypes live within us, and both are necessary for a psychological healthy life. Cited imbalance in either direction is not advisable. But in senex have different versions of the same. While the puer enjoys sports, socializing, games, eating out, going to movies, etc., which are all non-tangible products, the senex feels that play is engaging in a non-work activity that produces a tangible result. Painting, cooking, writing, building, and so on.
Get NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube TV on us. Plus get up to $1,000 on Google Pixel Fold, only on Verizon.
No longer harm. Never the messenger.
study a Xanax. He would make sculptures, carve inscriptions on stone, draw mandalas, and create the Red Book, full of images from the unconscious. In one of the most difficult periods of his life, which he called his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung felt a psychic disturbance in himself and went twice through all his childhood memories to try to find the cause of the disturbance. But this retrospection led to nothing but a fresh acknowledgement of his own ignorance. He said to himself, "Since I know nothing at all, I shall simply do whatever occurs to me." He writes, "The first thing that came to the surface was a childhood memory from perhaps my 10th or 11th year. At that time I had a spell of playing passionately with building blocks. I distinctly recalled how I had built little houses and castles. These structures had fascinated me for a long time. To my astonishment, this memory was accompanied by a good deal of emotion. Aha, I said to myself, there is still the small boy is still around and possesses a creative life which I lack. But how can I make my way to it?" Jung realized that he had been neglecting his inner child. He felt humiliated to realize that he had to play childish games in his old age. Nevertheless, he started gathering stones and slowly built a miniature village. He went to his building game after the noon meal every day until his patients arrived, and if he finished with his work early enough in the evening, he went back to building. In the course of this activity, his thoughts clarified, and he felt a source of creativity, enthusiasm, and a sense of renewal. He wrote, "This moment was a turning point in my fate. I had only the inner certainty that I was on the way to discovering my own myth, for the building game was only a beginning. It released a stream of fantasies which I later carefully wrote down." Jung's most ambitious project of Xanax play was building the tower situated at Bollingen, a product of 12 years of work. It is a solitary place, surrounded by nature near Lake Zurich. He would spend several months there each year and nourish his soul. He wrote, "At Bollingen I am in the midst of my true life. I am most deeply myself." The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry is one of the most well-known books in the world. He displays all the typical features of the poor Eternals, which, however, does not alter the fact that he was also a great writer. He worked as a professional aviator and died during World War II in an airplane crash. When he was not allowed to fly, he always became depressed, walking up and down in his flat from morning till evening, desperate and irritated. Saint-Exupéry begins with an introduction, like part of a personal autobiographical account. The book is based on the imagination of children and is very dreamlike. The narrator starts by saying that at the age of 6, he read about boa constrictors swallowing their prey whole without chewing them, after which they are unable to move and sleep through the 6 months that they need for digestion. Goring, which looks ordinary, has the entire mystery of Saint-Exupéry's life. He shows his masterpiece to the grown-ups and asks them whether they're drawing frightened them, but they say, "Why should anyone be frightened by a hand?" But his drawing was not a picture of a hand, it was a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. Since they were not able to understand it, he made another drawing. He draws inside the boa constrictor so that they can see the elephant clearly, since adults always need to have things explained. The grown-ups respond by advising him to re-establish drawings, focus on studying arithmetic, geography, grammar, etc. That is why, at the age of 6, he gave up what might have been a magnificent career as a painter. He then chose another profession, and he learned to pilot airplanes. Having done all the other work, whenever he met a grown-up, he would show them drawing number 1 to find out if that person was of true understanding. But they would always say, "It looks like a hat." So he lived his whole life alone, without anyone that he could really talk to, until he had an accident with his plane in the desert. This experience is linked with his personal life, in which he nearly died of thirst and experienced hallucinations. As he was trying to fix the plane, he heard an odd little voice say, "If you please, draw me a sheep." It was the little prince who had come down from the stars. He shows him the hat, and the little prince says that he doesn't want a boa constrictor that swallowed an elephant. He wants a sheep. This magical being from the unconscious is the first person he has met that understood him. However, he does not know how to draw a sheep, and after several failures, he draws a box instead, and in a tricksterish fashion says that the sheep he wants is inside it, for he's too busy trying to fix the engine of his plane. This symbolizes the conflict between the demands of the inner and outer life, which poses a tremendous tension. A common thing that a poor does is to put all his plans in a box and store them away, in a gesture of boredom and impatience. This is the great danger. Perhaps the most important thing a poor can do is to take something seriously and to stick to it. This first part of the novella contains the whole problem of the puer aeternus in a nutshell. We see that Saint-Exupéry has never really gotten used to living in the world of the adult. He was experiencing depression and disillusionment. It was as if his unconscious was saying to him that he must participate in the world and cannot always escape the unimaginative and banal world of everyday life. He felt as if his soul had completely dried up, and that he was dying of thirst, hence the image of the desert. This midlife crisis leads to conscious absent-mindedness, and one little mistake can cost one's life. The adult world lacks enchantment of nature and the magic found in fairy tales. It is totally dead. Saint-Exupéry writes, I know a planet where there is a certain red-faced gentleman. He has never smelled a flower. He has never looked at a star. He has never loved anyone. He has never done anything in his life but add up figures. And all day he says over and over, just like you, I am busy with matters of consequence, and that makes him swell up with pride. Saint-Exupéry speaks about the emptiness, idiocy, and meaninglessness of adulthood, and that the childhood life is the fantasy life, the artist's life, the true life. All the rest is empty persona, running after making money, making a prestige impression on other people, and having lost one's true nature. The problem is that he has not found a bridge by which he could take over the true life into the adult life. The English poet William Wordsworth wrote about this poignantly. There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth and every common sight, to me did seem, apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. At length the man perceives it die away, and fade into the light of common day. The fundamental question is, how can one grow up without losing the feeling of totality, the feeling of creativeness, magic, and of being really alive, which one had in youth? What is really going on in Saint-Exupéry's life is that his greater personality has been devoured by the mother, which suffocates life and prevents the human being from development and growth. One is permanently in the womb, and never leaves the mother's protective shell to go into the adult world. The Great Mother becomes the devouring mother, like the Hindu goddess Kali. Saint-Exupéry never embarks on the hero's journey, and that is the meaning of the elephant in the drawing, which is the greatest hero in Africa. In contrast to other mythological parallels, the strong hero cannot find his way out of his predator. The elephant is generous, intelligent, taciturn, but irritable and inclined to terrible moods and fits of rage, which can only be appeased by music, not by sensual pleasures. Amazingly, these were also the outstanding qualities of Saint-Exupéry. The elephant is the image in his soul of what he wanted to become, and it's swallowed back by the devouring mother, the regressive tendencies of the unconscious, and later by death. But Saint-Exupéry did not know that, though Bonfant says he came very close. To integrate the puer aeternus, one must bring oneself down to earth, not by having a one-sided view on the life of fantasy, but rather by exposing oneself to daily life, chores, and hard work. Fantasy, but rather by exposing oneself to daily life, chores, and hard work. The puer must also merge with the crowd to become the sheep that Saint-Exupéry put into a box, though this isn't without its dangers. A dangerous situation is cured by a dangerous situation. However, it is the antidote for a rather complex. Normally, very few young men have a strong enough individuality to pull away from the mother of their own accord. They do it by subjectivity. This is the first step of the cure. It's only by immersing oneself in society that one can experience a real sense of being part of a tribe that transcends individual desires and needs. The second step is that the puer must take care not to lose himself in the crowd. He must simultaneously sacrifice his inflated specialness and megalomania, which is his fake individuality, and not lose his real individuality by becoming a mere number in the crowd. This can be done by balancing one's social life with one's spiritual life. But if one never spends time alone, one may never build an indestructible foundation, which is crucial for self-realization. Nietzsche wrote, "When I am among the many, I live as the many do, and I do not think as I really think. After a time it always seems as though they want to banish me from myself and rob me of my soul, and I grow angry with everybody and fear everybody. I then require the desert, so as to grow good again." Jung likened the human lifespan to the passage of the sun over the course of 12 hours. The sun rises and we begin the day, birth. The sun rises in the sky. We grow from infancy to youth to young adulthood. The sun comes to the zenith at noontime, midlife, the peak of our abilities, vigor, and if we have been on the right path, career success. Then the sun begins to lose its altitude. We begin to age, until it finally sets. We die. These phases of life have different priorities and specific types of psychology. For Jung, the priority of the first half of life is the strengthening of the ego, work, education, relationships, and so on. It is only in the second half of life that we are sufficiently anchored in reality and our focus shifts to our inner world, to our quest for individuation. An imbalance in this transition is often the start of a midlife crisis, the cry of the soul for growth. Jung writes, "The significance of the morning of life undoubtedly lies in the development of the individual, our entrenchment in the outer world, the propagation of our kind, and the care of our children. This is the obvious purpose of nature. Whoever carries over into the afternoon of life the law of the morning, or the natural aim, must pay for it with damage to his soul. Just as surely as a grown youth tries to carry over his childish egoism into adult life, must pay for this mistake with social failure." Jung tells us that to cure the neurosis of the puer, one has to work. This is the most disagreeable word for a puer, because he has to sacrifice the wonder of the fantasy realm to a conventional life, which requires commitment and responsibility. It seems like utter madness to him, because he's letting go of his specialness. The crucial step is that he must drive out his devils and be careful that he doesn't also drive out his angels. This can only be achieved by focus on the inner world and the outer world, which is the purpose of individuation. Through work, the puer may actually become exceptional in reality, not in fantasy. It doesn't matter if one has no idea which job is the right one, or what one really wants to do. One has to stick with any kind of job and immerse oneself in the outer world. Søren Kierkegaard calls this type of anxiety the dizziness of freedom, the vertigo that comes from having to choose from a sea of infinite possibilities. Here one may either lose himself in the finite, becoming an imitation of other people, or lose oneself in the infinite, a state of analysis paralysis, where one thinks of all the possibilities but never acts. The puer usually tries various different
listen, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and it's meant to impart some wisdom upon you where if you just put everything into one area and it doesn't work out, your goose is cooked. So it's better not to just go all in on one thing, but instead have it spread out a little bit just for the sake of safety. But I want to tell you the story about what happens when you do put all of your eggs into one basket and you win. You catch a huge W, and this basket's name is Claude. About a month ago, I made a video covering one of the most desperate marketing plays I've ever seen from a major studio. Pixar released a desperate Hail Mary to try and drum up public interest in seeing their new film, Elemental. Elemental had a really rough opening box office performance. It was kind of a disastrous first quarter here for the movie. It was looking like it was going to be a colossal flop because there was just really no hype and no one was really getting excited enough to go actually see the film. So it was looking rough. It was looking like me in a tall person contest. It was bad. It was hard to look at. And in their moment of weakness, they turned to the dark side. TikTok turbo cringe. To try and appeal to the Zoomers, they hatched the nefarious scheme. This was an official post on their Twitter account as well. The caption said, Claude's got the whole theater rooting for him or something like that. So Claude was more revered and cheered for than Jesus Christ himself if he was resurrected again. And everyone was losing their mind over Claude in a fucking fantasy dimension, not reality. Very clearly, this is all fake. But it's such an interestingly delusional idea because this is a brand new film, brand new character, and this is their first time ever seeing Claude. Claude is a minor character in this movie. Like, no one had ever heard of him before. Why the fuck would the theater be cheering for him like they had just witnessed their home team win the fucking Super Bowl? Now, obviously, most of that cacophony of chaos is composed of stock cheering sound effects, but there is actually some original property in there as well from people that must have been called in to just make a lot of noise. They went to the Elemental intern staff and said, look, if you guys want to keep this job, we're going to need you to pop a fucking blood vessel in your neck cheering for our character Claude for this viral video we're trying to make, Jesus Christ. We need you now. And they just reluctantly kicked their feet and said, oh my god, whatever. Oh, Claude! And then it's like, alright, print it. And now we'll shake the camera around a little bit because our cameraman's also losing his fucking mind like he's getting thrown into a washing machine. It's like footage out of the Cloverfield movie. So that was the marketing campaign push they tried to make with Claude. Claude became the spearhead for the salvation operation of Elemental. And you know what's crazy? It worked. I just read the most recent report on Elemental's performance. It is the second highest grossing animated film of 2023, just behind Super Mario Brothers, and above Across the Spider-Verse. That's right. It fucking out-earned Across the Spider-Verse. It just goes to show you, never underestimate Claude. Like, I guess that's the takeaway here. Claude is some kind of Cronenberg-esque deity demon of success. Like, somehow they were able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat thanks to an extremely strong international performance in the box office, especially in South Korea. Apparently it fucking crushed it there. And it was able to turn around what was destined, fated to be a flop, and turned it into a financial success. Wild. Absolutely incomprehensible. I thought this was for sure kaput. I didn't think this stood a chance. I thought it flatlined. They must have called Doctor Strange and got him on the horn and said, look, we need you to look into the multiverse and tell us which one has us making a profit off of this film. And he found the only multiverse solution. Claude. That was the answer. I'm gonna be honest, I'm starting to suspect foul play. Something smells fishy here. This movie fell between the butt cheeks. No one was going to see it. And then they somehow pushed Claude really hard with, like, marketing such as this, like POV Claude actually lobotomizing an entire auditorium because they lost their mind looking at him. And somehow it worked? Like, I just refuse to believe Claude wields that kind of power. I don't know how this happened. I feel like they have to be lying about these numbers, just because it would be extremely embarrassing if it really was a massive flop. but I feel like that'd be highly illegal, and you could probably check the numbers through third-party sources, so it's probably not fake. It's just, I don't know, it's just so shocking that it somehow turned this around. It's making me believe in miracles. Like, who knows, maybe they'll re-release Morbius for the third time, and this time, Claude will endorse it, and then all of a sudden that shit fucking explodes straight to the moon. It's just, how? It out-earned Across the Spider-Verse, which is one of the best animated films ever made. This is an example of someone that was drowning, but then drank all of the water they were drowning in, so that way they were no longer drowning, and now their belly's nice and full. Elemental squeaked it out, and I want to be clear, this is not another example of me being wrong about a prediction. In my initial video I made, laughing at the goofy marketing material, I did say, you can never count out Claude. You never know what he's truly capable of, and man, did he put his best foot forward here, and he saved Elemental for them. So I wasn't wrong. I was doubtful, of course, but I never outright said this movie is, 6 feet under, doomed to fail. I don't think. Maybe I did. Actually, there's a really good chance I did. But I also did say there is a chance Claude could save it, and he did. So my little ears are hearing that I wasn't wrong. I really pinned the tail on the donkey here. I knew this could happen, and it did. So, yeah, I just wanted to give you that kind of report on how Elemental was salvaged, thanks to Claude, the hero. And since I'm keeping you all updated on that, I might as well update you on a couple other things. I'm doing my first ever live event on September 8th. It'll be the 8th, 9th, and 10th. It's going to be a giant party as well as like a meet and greet so you can meet myself and the team. And we're going to be watching and going crazy for our Moist Esports Apex team as they hopefully take home the World Championship. It'll be about 5 hours per day. Tickets are still for sale at strasscenter.org. It's $25 per day. Or if you want to do all 3 days, it'll be $60. So just wanted to give you an update on that. There's about half of the tickets left, so just keeping everyone in the know there. And another thing I also want to update people on is Plague Seeker. The limited edition variant covers are also almost gone. So I just wanted to give you all an update there in case you wanted to check out Plague Seeker issue 0. It's a comic book series I wrote myself this time around with Jackson. And I think it is an absolute fucking banger. So in case you missed the animation we dropped to celebrate issue 0, I'll just go ahead and play the whole fucking thing here as well. The tickets to both Plague Seeker as well as the tickets to the live events are going to be in the description of the video as well.
1,000 years ago, humankind ruled the earth. Even in their failings, they prospered across the planet. But that would all change in the blink of an eye.
You want to help your nerves? Stop stealing from killers. How many times have you cheated?
We called it the calamity.
Why did you get mixed up with this butcher?
Those who persevered beyond the impact never truly survived. The mutations made them something more than human. It drove them mad. Those closest to the calamity were transformed completely. Known as plagues, their overwhelming power leaves all helpless as they seek to dominate all food. The worst of them were born with nothing had the right to survive.
You should ask yourself why.
Terrifying beings look to us as the great.
And you accidentally killed the most people in history. That's right.
One single scientist created 3 inventions that accidentally caused the deaths of millions of people, including himself.
Go to the bridge.
Not only that, they decreased the average intelligence of people all around the world, increased crime rates, and caused 2 completely separate environmental disasters that we are still dealing with today. Part of this video is sponsored by Ren. More about them at the end of the show. In 1944, as a young chemist who had just finished his master's, Claire Patterson went to work on an project, building the first nuclear weapons. His job was to concentrate uranium-235, the fissile fuel for bombs, from the much more common uranium-238. And this required huge machines, mass spectrometers, which separated the 2 types of uranium by their slight difference in mass.
Yeah, I'll be going to the
Mongols here
After
too.
the war, Patterson went back to grad school to get his PhD. He picked a research project that took advantage of his experience with mass spectrometry. Measuring the age of the Earth. Radioactive rocks are effectively rocks. Uranium-238, for example, decays into thorium until it ends up in lead-206 in the The rate of this decay is consistent and can be measured. It takes 4.5 billion years for a sample of U-238 to decay to lead-206.
I don't know if I trust it. What is science ever?
Measuring the ratio of uranium to lead in primordial rocks. To calibrate his instrument, first he used zircon crystals whose ages were known. Zircon is ideal for this purpose because when it forms, it contains trace amounts of uranium but absolutely no lead. So any lead you later find inside a zircon, you know must be the product of a uranium decay. Patterson was tasked with measuring the lead content in another
Whatever you want. Sake, saddle polish,
uranium measurements were
nice.
fine. They matched predictions.
Why risk your
But
life
Patterson's
over
lead measurements
trifles?
were all over the place.
Not trifles.
And they were many, many times
I
higher
need
than they
food,
expected.
money,
George's
a
uranium.
warm fire.
You helped me save Taka. Delivered medicine to people in need.
Yeah.
So where was all
That
this
was
extra lead
heroic,
coming
wasn't
from?
The aliens gave it
That
to us.
mystery
Talent,
would
Kenji.
take over the
It's
rest
time you
of
use
Claire
it.
Patterson's life
For the sake of
and
our
bring him
island.
to the literal ends of the earth.
Of course.
In 1908, a woman
Honor
was
is my
driving across
specialty.
the Belle Isle Bridge in Detroit when her car stalled. A passing motorist stopped to help. In those days, cars needed to be hand-cranked to start.
The good old
Knelt
days,
down
baby.
and turned the crank. The engine roared to life, a little too suddenly. The man couldn't get out of the way. The crank handle hit him in the face and broke his jaw.
Fucking idiot.
He died as a result of his
what?
injuries. His name was Byron Carter.
What the
He
fuck?
was the founder of his own car company.
He died of a broken jaw?
Byron Carter.
An awful way of going out. He developed pneumonia as a result of injuries he sustained when trying to hand crank start a car stranded on the Belle Island Bridge near Detroit. Huh. What a terrible way of going out. Holy shit. Is Yusuf Donovan in Kino? It wasn't the hit that killed him, but he wouldn't have gotten pneumonia without getting hit, I guess. So I don't really see how getting hit in the jaw can result in pneumonia. Because it's your own Conrad, Yusuf Prince.
Lord Samurai,
True, I guess, yeah, it was just
I have a message for you.
1800s.
do you need anything, my lord?
Yeah.
So he was well connected in the Detroit auto scene. He counted among his close friends the founder of Cadillac, Henry Leland. Leland was so distraught
I'm
over his
just being
friend's death that he
but I do
resolved
want
to
your help.
eliminate
A map
hand
was
cranks
stolen from
his
me.
vehicles.
I need it back.
Leland hired
Kenji
Charles
speaks very
Henry
highly
to
of
I
create
won't
this.
commit
a
crimes
self-starting
for you,
car.
Lady Sanjo.
By
Even if
1911,
Kenji is
he
a
had
friend of
a
yours.
working
So we're
prototype.
clear. The map marks the locations where food is stored. This is how I feed Toyotoma's people.
So you need me to find the thief.
Oh, I know where he is. Hiding in a gambler's
The
den by
world's
the
first
Three
crankless
Paths
car
Well.
was the
I
Cadillac
just
Model
need
30.
you to
It was much more
retrieve the map.
powerful than
I'll
cars
see what I
before.
can do.
It had a top
If you're
speed of
lying to me.
45
Lord
miles
Sakai,
per hour,
I
40
am
horsepower,
nothing if not
double the
honest.
Ford Model T.
Just ask
The
the
Model
last
30
man who
was a
questioned my
huge success
sincerity.
for Cadillac,
You'll find
doubling
his
the
head
company's
covered in
annual
flies
sales.
out back.
But it had a problem. It was deafeningly loud. In internal combustion engines, a
Raising
piston
Cane's
compresses
fine.
the fuel-air mixture, which is then ignited
Above
by a
average,
spark
but not
from the
up
spark
to the
plug.
hype.
The expanding
Be
hot
careful.
gases push the
Many
piston
people
back
know
down.
that Fifu took the
The
map,
problem with
and
the
the
Model
lengths
30
I'll go to
engine
get
was
it
it
back.
compressed the fuel-air mixture more than previous models. So
So much, in fact, that often the fuel would spontaneously combust before the spark from the spark plug. So rather than orderly, perfectly timed explosions, you get multiple haphazard combustions leading to turbulent pressure waves inside the cylinder. The resulting sound led the problem to become known as engine knocking. Knocking wasn't just hard on the ears, it hurt the engine's performance. It reduced power output and lowered fuel efficiency. The vibrations also damaged the piston and walls of the cylinder, shortening the life of the engine.
We all agreed on that.
The good news
but it was
was
fine,
that
like it was above
knocking
average
could be corrected by changing the fuel. Different fuels can withstand different levels of compression before detonating. And heptane, for example, will spontaneously combust under only a little compression. Isooctane, on the other hand, can withstand a much higher compression ratio before it auto-ignites, so it's much less likely to cause knocking. To quantify how much compression a fuel can withstand, scientists came up with the octane rating system. They arbitrarily set isooctane to have a rating of 100 and N-heptane a rating of 0. Now, real fuels aren't made up of only these two ingredients. They're a mix of lots of different hydrocarbons, but the octane rating tells you what mixture of octane and heptane gives equivalent performance. For example, 98 octane fuel can withstand the same compression as a mixture of 98% octane and 2% heptane. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of 98 octane fuel and put it in this piston, and when I compress it, nothing happens, which is exactly what you'd expect. This fuel can withstand a lot of compression. Diesel has an octane rating of 20, so it acts like a mixture of 20% isooctane and 80% N-heptane. If I put a little bit of diesel in there, let's see what happens with the same compression ratio.
It blows his hand off.
There you go. You get a little explosion in there. That's because this is a low octane fuel. I mean, that's what diesel's meant to do. Press it and it ignites. But you don't want this sort of fuel.
Diesel just sounds cool.
The reason really recommend high octane fuel is to prevent knocking in their high compression, high performance engines.
Jin, over here.
Kettering wanted to find an additive which would increase the octane rating of ordinary fuel and eliminate knocking in high compression engines. So he hired 27-year-old engineer Thomas Midgley Jr. Midgley experimented with all sorts of compounds, from melted butter and camphor to ethyl
What I
acetate
need
and
is
aluminum
justice
chloride.
for my family's
He later
murder.
wrote most of them had no more effect than spitting in the
Maybe
Great
one
Lakes.
step closer once I catch the snake.
Ethanol was an
named Uma.
interesting exception.
One of the conspirators on the list.
Knocking, but you needed a
He
lot
supplied the
about
weapons that
10%
butchered
of
my
the fuel
family.
mixture for it to be effective.
And we will find
That
him.
much ethanol would be
And we can talk.
expensive and hard to turn a profit on. And Midgley was really apprehensive that it was cheap, easy to produce, and effective even at low concentrations. So he kept trying. Then he hit on tellurium. It worked wonderfully as an anti-knock agent, but it had a terrible
Omida's rumored to be traveling to Unubi.
by
I
changing
just
clothes
don't know,
or bathing.
so I've been
His
camping
wife
out.
was so offended by the stench that he
You
had
can
to
keep
sleep in
watch
the
from
basement
here.
for 7 months.
Jesus
Do
Christ.
you know what Omura
I
looks
don't think
like?
that
I'm not
although
sure.
this doubled the
I
fuel
haven't seen him
economy,
in 20 years.
humanity would
You knew
suffer
them.
He's
this.
a sign of our clan, but he cheated us.
On
Then tried to
December 3rd,
blame my husband for not
1921,
paying him
after
enough.
5 years
How
of working on the
stinky
problem,
was it?
Midgley
Please,
found what he
watch
thought
the
was the perfect
Get
solution.
comfortable.
Tetraethyl
We might be
lead.
here a while.
That's a lead atom right there in the center. This additive was exactly what he was looking for.
Men on
It
the
stopped the
walkway.
knocking,
They look
it
just
didn't
like
smell, it was cheap to
Exactly like
produce and
Omura
readily
20
available.
years ago.
Best of all,
Must
you
be
only
his
needed
sons.
one
With
part
the
in a
oath
1,000
involved?
for it to be effective. In a call to Kettering, Midgley said, "Can you imagine how much money we're going to make with this? We're going to make $200 million, maybe even more. That is over $3 billion in today's dollars." Now, for his discovery, the American Chemical Society gave him the prestigious Nichols
I'll take the
Award.
left. You
They
take
asked him
right.
to do
The
a series
canyon
of
is
public
narrow.
talks,
Stay high
but
to avoid
Midgley
being
declined. He and Kettering patented the process for making tetraethyl lead, and they called their new additive ethyl, perhaps so it may be confused with another common additive, ethyl alcohol. They made no mention of lead. Then they teamed up with 3 of America's largest corporations, General Motors, DuPont, and Standard Oil of New Jersey, to form the Ethyl Corporation. Their marketing was brilliant.
Go back and look at the amazing record of accomplishment here in this research division without confidence that these men are going ahead with an eye to the future, looking for new facts and principles which will make things better and make life easier for all of us.
Yeah, America! We like lead.
There, come out.
At the 1923 Indianapolis 500, the top 3 finishers all used ethyl, and the demand for leaded gasoline took off. To keep up, Ethyl Corporation had to build a new chemical plant in New Jersey, but the project began terribly. Within 2 months of operating, dozens of workers fell ill with lead poisoning. 5 of them died. To address the public outcry, Beachley held a press conference. There, he poured tetraethyl lead onto his hands, and he inhaled it for a whole minute. He claimed he could do this daily without harm. But Beachley knew the dangers. The reason he had turned down the public talks was because he spent much of 1923 in Florida, where he himself was recovering from lead poisoning. He didn't go anywhere near his company's product if he could help it. Lead is dangerous even in small doses.
Holy shit.
It mimics calcium in our bodies, so there's no efficient way to get rid of it. And like calcium, lead can be stored in bones for years, meaning it can continue to poison the body long after the initial exposure. The organ most sensitive to lead is the brain. Lead breaks down the myelin sheath around axons and prevents the release of neurotransmitters. That's why common symptoms of lead poisoning are headaches, memory loss, and tingling in the hands and feet. And children are particularly susceptible. Lead exposure can cause permanent learning disorders and behavioral problems. And the dangers of lead have been known for hundreds of years. Already in 1786, Benjamin Franklin remarked that lead had been used for far too long, considering its known toxicity. You will observe with concern how long a useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced on. He would have been aghast to learn that nearly 150 years later, scientists plan to add lead to fuel. Doctors and public health officials from MIT, Harvard, Yale, and the U.S. Health Service wrote to Midgley and warned them against producing tetraethyl lead. They called lead a creeping and malicious poison and a serious menace to public health. Their concerns were dismissed.
This model shows how just the right amount of fluid containing tetraethyl lead and dye is added to the gasoline.
No one doubted that a lot of lead was bad for you, but how much harm could a little lead do?
Do you like Zilconi?
By the 1950s, millions of motorists globally were burning lead in their cars and releasing it into the air. Some of that lead ended up on Claire Patterson's zircon samples, preventing him from determining their age.
I should find muscle.
In 1952, he moved to Caltech, where he built a new lab from scratch. Suspicious of environmental contamination, he tore the electrical cables out of the walls to remove the lead solder. He cleaned the floors and benches daily with ammonia and made sure that air was always being blown out of the lab. To go inside,
The one
he
I
had to
followed
wear
was
a
in both.
plastic bunny
He
suit.
spoke of revenge against
Patterson
another chief.
basically
What are we
invented
waiting
the
for?
clean room.
He's on his way to meet the man who
Inside
hired
that room,
him.
The man who
he
ordered
turned his
my
attention to
family
the
murdered.
oldest rocks
Let's
in
get
the
this
solar
straight.
system,
Hear what they're saying.
meteorites.
Fuck.
All the original
Because
rocks
it's
on
so
Earth
big.
had long since been destroyed by tectonic activity. But meteorites come from asteroids, which formed around the same time as Earth. They have just been drifting through space until they entered the Earth's atmosphere. So the best way to measure the age of the Earth was to measure the age of meteorites. Patterson measured 5 meteorites, each with 3 different radiometric dating techniques, and he found that they were all 4.55 billion years old. That number is within 0.15% of the currently accepted value for the age of the Earth. Before Patterson's experiment, people thought the Earth was a billion years younger. So Patterson had done it. He measured the age of the Earth. But he wasn't done getting rid of lead contaminants. Public concern about lead exposure had continued to grow. But the president of Standard Oil, Frank Howard, pushed back, saying, "We do not feel justified in giving up what has come to the industry like a gift from heaven on the possibility that a hazard may be involved in it."
Scientists funded by the Ethel Corporation claimed that lead was a natural part of our environment, and therefore not harmful to people. But Patterson wondered, just how natural is the lead in our environment? And he had just the skills to find out.
He started eating dirt for 5 years and then measured his own blood.
He began by measuring lead in the oceans. If it were natural, he expected the concentration of lead to be the same regardless of depth. But if lead pollution had increased recently, it would be more concentrated near the surface. He took samples in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans down to a depth of 4 kilometers. And sure enough, lead concentrations were nearly 10 times higher near the surface. Lead pollution was clearly recent, but when exactly had it occurred? To find out, Patterson had to go to Greenland and Antarctica. Ice cores record the level of lead in the air going back thousands of years. The levels of lead in the atmosphere have been elevated for the last 4,500 years. All of it is due to human activity, mainly smelting ores to make metal. You can see the rise and fall of the Greek and Roman empires, the dip caused by the Black Death in the 1300s, and of course the spike in the 20th century due to industrialization and tetramethyl lead. So what did this do to people? Patterson looked at the lead levels in the teeth and bones of recently deceased Americans, and for comparison, he measured the lead in bones and teeth of Peruvian and Egyptian monks. Since they lived over 2 years ago, they would have exposed to much less lead in their lifetimes. He expected to find modern Americans had about 100 times as much lead in their bones, but the results showed it was closer to a factor of 1,000. 20th century Americans had 1,000 times more lead in their bones than their ancestors. Studies of baby teeth revealed that even lead exposure well below the level considered safe resulted in delayed learning,
I heard him talking about the leather.
IQ,
I might still have it on him.
behavioral problems.
I'll check the bandits. See if they're holding anything.
In front of everybody at the lead industry.
That's pretty wild.
It's extremely toxic and extremely low doses.
A follow-up study showed that those with higher levels of lead in their baby teeth were many times more likely to fail out of high school. As a result of studies like these, the CDC's guidelines for the acceptable level of lead in children's blood dropped from 60 micrograms per deciliter down to 3.5. And as far as we know today, there is no safe level of lead.
Judging by this
Globally,
note,
lead is
clearly
believed to be responsible for nearly 2/3 of all unexplained intellectual
he has no
disability.
clan at all.
According to a study published in 2022, more than half of the current U.S. population, that's 170 million people, were exposed to high levels of lead in early childhood. Those born between 1951 and 1980 are disproportionately affected. The authors estimate that in aggregate, lead caused the loss of more than 800 million IQ points. The world is less intelligent today because of lead gases.
There is no
There are even more troubling correlations.
One of my family's
The U.S.
killers
saw a
walks
steady
free in
rise in
Kubara.
crime from the
Find me
1970s
there
to the
when you can.
1990s. Then it abruptly declined. This graph looks eerily similar to a plot of preschool blood lead levels, just offset by 20 years. The obvious question is, did kids who were exposed to higher levels of lead grow up to commit more crimes than they otherwise would have? You might think this is just a spurious correlation, but the same pattern appears in many countries, including Britain, Canada, and Australia. And we know there's a causal connection between lead exposure and antisocial or violent behavior. A study of 340 teenagers found that those who were arrested were 4 times as likely to have elevated lead in their bones than similar demographic controls. But this doesn't mean that
it's almost over. What leads to the higher levels of lead concentration in the infants and like the newborns and all of that? Is it just like how close they are to gasoline or what?
We must all
Water,
be
I guess,
someone.
contained.
Who must you be?
Lord
Yeah.
Sakai.
Lead's present pretty much all food that's
the
grown in the
samurai
ground, but
are
I feel
all
like that's
dead.
not going to be a huge
I'm
contributing
very
factor
much
for like
alive.
the newborn. The newborn's not going to
Patience
be
is
on
dying.
apples, right?
Lord Shimura asks that you repay
But yeah,
your
lead
debt
is
to him
literally in everything that grows from the soil.
What does he want?
to deliver a message
Tap
to the
water?
mainland.
Is there lead in the tap water?
I charged a lot for that trip, even before the Mongol blockade.
You owe my master a debt. This will repay it.
Then I have no choice.
Lead pipes. Oh, interesting.
After Komoda Beach,
Thanks
I
for
thought my
Dakota.
debt to Lord Shimura was erased. That's why I was drinking.
To celebrate your escape?
To mourn the samurai.
At least I didn't think of lead pipes. It's like in older
died
houses and shit.
protecting men like me.
It's almost never zero. Well, yeah, you really can't escape lead consumption anymore.
That's how you feel.
It is literally
courage.
in everything.
Help
Like,
us
again,
avenge them.
every vegetable, every fruit, all of it
samurai
has trace
to do
amounts
that.
of lead.
We will
Literally
save them
everything you consume
when you
does.
deliver Lord
I was just
Shimura's
wondering what would
message.
cause, like, for infants and all of that to have increased levels of lead. I guess it would probably just be where they are in the world and what they're eating.
This is my home. Come in.
Very prevalent in seafood too. Yeah, he even brought up that graph where the guy was studying lead concentration in surface versus
He
deep.
has it. At his camp on the Akashima coast.
The mother passes lead into the baby.
One of my
I don't
boats
even know if you're
is
serious
hidden.
enough, and I
Your
love the
fort
idea that when a woman's
This map
pregnant,
shows
she
where
starts
I
like
wait
giving
on
lead to the
Forest
baby inside the body. Like a lead fucking ball bearing or something. It serves as like the core for a human being.
Goro! We're not leaving until you pay us what you owe.
There's lead particles in the air due to farts.
I didn't call for Ronin.
My lord,
There's no way.
what's your business with Goro?
Private.
Learning about lead.
We'll be
the man
back.
who accidentally killed the most people in history. Yeah, apparently it's from him creating leaded gasoline. Mm-hmm. I'll turn all the captions around so you can read. It's actually pretty wild. That is possible since they're technically growing inside them, so lead gets transferred unintentionally into the infant. I mean, that's possible. Fetal alcohol syndrome, don't smoke. Of course, what the mom eats would affect the baby. Fetal alcohol syndrome's a little different, though, I would think, right? I don't think lead would work the same way, passing it down. But again, I don't know. I'm not a fucking baby scientist. Makes me some Krispy Kreme.
That lead is responsible for all of the increase in crime, but it's very likely responsible for some of it. Now, it's tough to estimate the precise death toll of lead. One of its lesser-known effects is a hardening of the arteries, leading to increased cardiovascular disease. A study from 2018 found lead was likely responsible for 250,000 heart disease deaths per year in the U.S. Assuming a constant rate over the past century, that amounts to 25 million deaths in the U.S. alone.
I found Goro in
Globally,
Umugi Cove.
the figure may approach 100
Was he
million.
drunk?
Most of those deaths
Not
are
anymore.
due to Midgley's decision to put lead
He will fulfill
in
his debt to you
gasoline, a
and sail
substance
for the
he knew
mainland.
firsthand was toxic, but he did it
May be
anyway to
unsavory,
maximize profits.
but few know the sea like
Is
you.
not over. Current estimates
Will
of
these
deaths
men
caused
deliver
by
your
lead
message?
range from 500
Precisely.
to 900,000
Kotaro and Jiro are loyal
per
and
year.
courageous.
In 2020,
I will petition the
UNICEF
Shogun for
reports that
reinforcements.
1 in 3 children globally,
Goro is
that's
ready.
over 800
He will meet us
million
nearby
children,
and lead us to his boat.
blood lead levels
He
at
will
or
ride on
above
the
5
tiniest rat.
micrograms per deciliter. A lot of this
Take
lead
this
now
one.
comes from batteries and industrial processes, but some is still due to Midgley's invention. After Midgley's success with
It
Apple,
is time.
he was put in charge of another.
To your horses, men.
We are
GM
ready.
wasn't just making
Tail
cars,
and keep
but also
watch for our
household
smuggling.
appliances. Fridges had a problem. The two most common gases
leaded
used as
fridges.
refrigerants were methylformate and
I can always
sulfur
tell when you
One
want to ask
is
me
highly
something.
toxic, the other is flammable.
I'm curious how you met Goro.
I caught him selling Chinese silk for
In
Biddy by
1928, he developed a
burned
non-toxic,
his stuff.
non-flammable refrigerant, dichloro-difluoromethane.
He could have been
GM called
flawed,
this new product
but you
Freon.
saw a better
To
path.
demonstrate Freon's
skilled sailor
safety, during
to
the
be
unveiling of the
valuable.
American Chemical Society, Midgley inhaled a lungful of this gas and blew out a candle. In the following decades, CFCs like Freon became very popular.
Among us are many
things,
ships.
but cowardly is
Can
not.
Goro
The
evade them
problem
all?
is
He has no choice.
CFCs
What
are
will we
light
do if they
and
catch us,
stable.
my lord?
When
Do not
released
fear
into the
death,
atmosphere,
Kotaro.
they climb
Live with
up
courage.
into the
Never
stratosphere
forget the
plural
and
for
remain for
protect.
50 to 100
Goro.
years.
You know that?
But if
Where
the
is your
CFC
boat?
molecule is hit by an ultraviolet photon of just the right
I'm happy
energy,
you're alive,
it breaks
my lord.
apart,
Thank you for
releasing
agreeing to
a
settle
chlorine
our
atom.
debts.
And this chlorine atom can then react with ozone, breaking it apart into chlorine monoxide and oxygen gas. The result was another environmental disaster, the hole in the ozone layer. With less ozone, more UV light penetrates the atmosphere, increasing the rates of skin cancer and cataracts. Plus, CFCs are potent greenhouse gases. Per kilogram, they produce 10,000 times more warming than CO2.
The Mongols have it.
The historian John McNeill wrote that
Imagine their
MIGLY had more
surprise
impact on
until
the
someone
atmosphere
take
than
it
any
back
other
from
single organism in Earth's history.
So this guy was an actual
Spaced out
Crews will
CFCs,
look
the
to it
Montreal
instead of
Protocol
the
went into effect in
Goro.
1989.
We will draw
The
the
ozone-
enemy's attention
He
to
might
the
still be
fort.
alive. Be
Say
kept
when you
alive
hear the
by
fighting.
lead and
My lord,
chlorofluorocarbons.
you'll be killed.
Your only concern is delivering my message. Horses might give us
Died.
We will go
Oh,
on
this is his
foot.
wife. I was going to say, died in 2018. Fucking good run. He died in 1944. Oh, this wasn't his wife. This was his daughter, I guess. Damn, she had a real good run. Damn you, Thomas.
The layer is now showing signs of recovery,
Mongol armies are
although it will
formidable.
take many more
But our
decades
attack will
to
catch
fully
them off guard.
recover.
Let's pray that
In
holds true in the fort.
1940, at the age of
They outnumber
51,
us.
Midgley
But they cannot
contracted
attack all
polio
at
and
once.
became physically
How long can we
disabled.
keep the element
So
of
to help him
surprise?
get up, he
Only
devised a
until we see the
mechanical
enemy.
bed controlled by a series of ropes and pulleys.
Then,
On November 2nd, 1944, while using the contraption, he became tangled in the ropes and died of strangulation. Thanks to the work of Claire Patterson,
We
it
could avoid
became
them.
clear
Turn
that
your
the
back
lead
on the
in our
phone,
environment
and you will
is
die
not
with a sword
natural.
stuck in it.
Burning lead in combustion engines spread the toxic element across the planet, into the air, oceans, the snow at the South Pole, and even our bones. Japan was the first to ban leaded fuel in cars in 1986. Other countries soon followed suit. Nigeria was the first to do so in 2021. The UN lead gas saves over 1 million lives per year and $2.45 trillion. But leaded gas is still used.
Are you ready?
The U.S. now the largest source of lead emissions into the air in the U.S. You will observe with concern how long useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced. When I first learned about Thomas Midgley's I was amazed by how much or how good a single person
coming out of the gate.
On Rent's website, targeted to emit which activities have the greatest impact. And if you like, you can offset your emissions through a monthly subscription. Funds raised go to support a variety of projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. One project I particularly like involves collecting lead in California forests. This helps prevent wildfires. Plus,
Perfect form, Chief. Well done.
a material that blocks the carbon dioxide.
Forward, through that gate.
The projects you support. It's completely transparent with
Hey,
photos and
out,
details
fight
of
beside you, Chief. See how the enemy fear you. A true warrior.
Thank you, Uncle.
And for the first 100 people who sign up using the link in the description, I will personally pay for the first month of your subscription.
Yeah, you know he's
So
50
I want
years
to
old.
thank Randy
Watch us! Take cover! With me! Wreak havoc on the fort! We need the Mongol ships to focus here, not on Goro! Push on! Push on! Last of us, right! For letting now! Kill them all!
In November 2016, Kurzgesagt published a video on the most gruesome parasites. It tells a story of devastating the world governments couldn't solve, so the big pharma stepped in to be the hero of humanity and save the day. It's one of those too good to be true stories, so I decided to look it up myself. And the Cubans are nowhere near glaring for the big pharma as Kurzgesagt presents. Pharmaceutical corporations did donate their medicine to the most experienced, but they didn't do it out of their own volition. They did it after decades of neglected diseases because they learned properly how to manufacture this.
Fight to the tower,
That's not super surprising to hear at all. I haven't seen the video that he's talking about. That absolutely sounds part of course. That goes for everything. You're not going to pursue something that they can't make a profit on. That's exactly how I get it. I don't know if anyone ever looked at pharmaceutical companies or anyone that's making medicine is something that works safe. They just want to save the world. That's not surprising. Maybe the video is making arguments that this company, they're heroes, saviors that wanted to push us to salvation. Maybe, but I highly doubt that's what it was.
Big Pharma never came to us. It was the World Health Organization to eradicate the disease they claimed to convince the government.
Just look at insulin, for an example.
Pharmaceutical lobbies that received the risk. These corporations took home almost $9 trillion in profits in 18 years. This little stunt is really just a pocket change.
Big plans.
More like capacity that they really invested in many of the properties that are trades this year. They own major holdings in many of the participating companies.
Does the channel ever portray them as heroes, though? Of the ones I've seen where he does mention where they do mention pharmaceutical companies, I don't know if I got the impression that he, like, puts them on some pedestal as heroes. Or so just looking at what they did and how it affected it, or changed it. Okay, so it's not just me. I never got that impression. It didn't really seem more matter of fact, like, again, they did actually step in and do things. Everything I ever saw from the channel was just like, they stepped in and they did this. And they just have like a cutesy animation associated with it. I never really got the impression that they were trying to suck the dick of the pharmaceutical companies. Again, I guess it could just be. I always thought they were a bit sweet sometimes when they're out looking that much else. That's interesting because usually the takeaway, and what a lot of this boils down to, is they don't look at things bleak, they look at things highly optimistic. And since they do receive funding from, I guess, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that optimism could be more as like a propaganda tool. Interests in the best light. So that's where it all kind of stems from. Most people don't find it bleak.
The Mongols
Actually, the opposite.
And their attack ships are faster. Our men are defenseless.
And both Bill and Melinda Gates are trustees of two pharma firms. This video isn't positive news.
Weapon of the enemy,
it's a positive PR.
Saving our people is all that matters.
They wouldn't have made this video if it wasn't paid for.
You know how to fire this.
Okay, what else has happened?
Destroy the Mongol ships.
Glossed over that pretty
Leave
quick.
the gods to
What I
me.
can say for us is the best case scenario, the
You will not
Foundation
die
would
here,
have
my
been
boy.
nothing but hands-on. Probably would not have made the horrible Parasites video without the grant, for example.
The Mongols sent forth in
challenge and
Don't let their boats reach Goro.
It's working. The Mongol ships are in flames.
Don't let up. Goro must outrun them.
This one video is the perfect location of everything that's wrong with billionaires continuing in the public thing. You find a white launch take on Billionaires, which deliberately elevates the role of private equity and gives a
Watches on the
marketing
shore.
their agenda.
Slow down, Goro.
The ultra-wealthy are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the media and the governing body is a great example of that. When billionaires move the ultra market to this place, they'll own media outlet that tells the market how important investment innovations and economic growth are. They'll donate to research and will give to the argument that whatever they decide to do is time. They'll give the political campaign and the right candidate elected, but as laws they lobby for are easier to pass. We have actually find this to be a problem.
All true.
All they get to do. And this is what it gives our trust.
More ships on the way. Hold on, Goro.
How does that tie in to the future?
So, if it is a problem with billionaires amongst our politicians, our journalists, and our producers, is it also a problem with our YouTubers?
Bring us the Shogun's help.
Billionaire funding is a lot more prevalent on YouTube than you might think. It's far beyond the scope of this one 6-year-old video. I didn't realize I was watching a video sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation because Critzak didn't reveal this information in the last 20 seconds of the video.
Well, I imagine it's in the description, though, right?
Jin, my
It'd be
message
illegal.
to the Shogun included
You have to make it very, like, one of the main things you have to make it very clear
adopt you as my son.
that it's a sponsored video.
Uncle.
In my heart, you have always been the heir to my legacy. When this war
Interesting.
ends,
It's not immediately clear. It's not in the description here.
one day our people will look to you as their leader. You will become their honorable Jito,
So was this video?
backed by all the
I
power
want to
of
see
the
for
Shogun.
myself where it comes in and how.
I hope I can serve them as well as you have.
This video was made possible in part by a grant from
We
the
must
Bill and
finish our
Melinda Gates
preparations
Foundation
while
and
we
your
wait for
support
the
on
Shogun's
patreon.com.
Reinforcements. What are your orders?
Okay, so it's not per se a sponsored video, but I can see where this would easily be a bit yucky, where a grant did help fund this video, and the information paints the things that this is involved in a very positive way. But I guess it's not per se a sponsored video.
Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and your support on patreon.com. If you want to help us make more videos, you can do so here. If you're disappointed,
That's very interesting. What does it matter? Well, what do you mean, what does it matter? Let's say I'm paying Kotaku to post an article about, what is that, a mobile game that I've made. And I'm like, hey, maybe just look at the mobile game and talk about, you know, some cool features that we're thinking about. You know, talk about mobile gaming in general, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about my game when talking about, like, these innovative features. And it's not mentioned till the end that my input or my money helped write that article. It's a really bad example. That's actually a terrible example. Because this is a grant, not a direct contribution, I suppose. It's a better way of explaining it. Nah, you know, fuck it. I'm going to stand on that. I think the concept should be pretty clear. If you are getting money, or if you have money come in, and you make a video that kind of paints everything where that money came from in a positive way, it seems a bit less than genuine. it seems like perhaps that financial incentive may have skewed some information in order to make it more favorable to the person or the group where the money came from. That's why, like, if a review is sponsored, everyone takes the review less seriously, because it's like, oh, not going to say anything overly harsh because you had money come in from that company. Isn't that what you do, though? What, pay Kotaku to talk about my mobile game? That I don't have one. Thanks for your subs, Sonic, Lauren, and Dumpy, the 5 Goose subs Fundy.
My lord, please, help
I don't think it's a big deal. Well, I don't know if it's a big deal yet. I haven't finished the video. But I could see, like, at least the argument for it, where if they're getting money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a lot of the things they talk about paint everything that this foundation does in a positive light, without addressing, like, any kind of negative stuff, that seems a little odd, as if it's been influenced by the money.
She said she'd catch up.
Seems more ulterior motive driven, which I think is kind of the core of where this comes from, calling it a propaganda machine for billionaires. Yeah, I saw it. I didn't see the whole video, Neon, but it was on my homepage. I watched some of it when I was in bed this morning.
Someone there should remember the girl.
This is Bits Dojin.
Philip first found out about the sponsorship from Kurtzak Medium article on how they treat sponsors. Here, Philip Detmer, the owner of the channel, admitted that Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was their biggest supporter. So big, in fact, it helped transform Kurtzak into a powerhouse. But Philip Detmer also told us that Kurtzak is almost entirely viewer funded. I wanted to know where the truth lies, so I went to the foundation's grant database and found this. In November 2015, Kurtzak was awarded $570,000 from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for a 49-month-long contract.
I'm looking for a girl
I wanted to
named
see the
Kuma.
full extent of this contract, so I started going through their YouTube videos to see how many were made for the foundation. And that's when I entered a rabbit hole. I was able to identify at least 8 videos Kurtzak made for the Gates Foundation. When they were awarded the Gates grant...
Is it for the Gates Foundation? I don't think so.
You need a new quiver.
I've seen some of these. I never got the impression they were for anyone aside from just bringing light to a topic.
Do you know a girl by the name of Kuma?
The merchant's daughter? Yeah, I know her. Haven't seen her in days, though.
I need to find her.
Sorry. Can't
When
help
they
you.
were awarded the Gates grant, the Patreon was relatively small, yielding less than $9,000 per month. The money from Gates was $11,000 per month, or $71,250 per video. So the Gates money alone would be at least on par with their Patreon, but Gates wasn't alone. Throughout my research, I kept discovering more and more billionaire-sponsored videos. It's not just one foundation. It's George Soros, the Templetons, and Facebook co-founder Dustin Moskowitz. They also made a sponsored video for this professor from Oxford University, William McCaskill, who is funded by Open Philanthropy. And Kurtzak also received money from Bill Gates' personal blog and venture capitalist funds. From what I was able to find, Kurtzak made at least one video for Open Society Foundation. At least 3 videos for charity, 3 videos for Bill Gates' blog, and 3 for energy, and 1 video for William McCaskill.
He keeps saying made the videos for them, but in none of these videos does it promote anything. At least not that I can recall from the ones I've seen.
We can speak privately here. Kuma is a friend.
It doesn't really.
Last I saw her, she was leaving with the man who promised her a job.
Much either about like the actual.
Running an inn. She wanted to earn some money for her mother.
So I guess if you look at the animation, for example, and it had like free drug ribbon stamped on one of the things, and the doctor giving like a thumbs up, I guess you could interpret that as like, wow, this is an incredible company and they're fucking heroes. I could maybe see that. But I feel like that's just more because the audience is all over the place in terms of age, so that kind of animation is going to resonate and make it clear to everyone like what's going on, as opposed to it being more like a patting on the ass at a celebration. At the very end of all of them, he says who it was funded by. Yeah. So that's what I just learned. Usually, when it comes to a sponsored video, you have to make it abundantly clear that it is sponsored, which is why at the top of every description that's sponsored, it has the sponsor. The grant to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is not even in the description. It's in the last 20 seconds, where most people have probably already clicked off. Because it's not technically sponsored. They have funding from the foundation, but they didn't sponsor this video. They just have money from the grant, and that money helped create this video. But they didn't make it for them. There's some Chance, Flash, Harley, Half-Brain, the Prime P3.
We know they were awarded $500 million from the Gates Foundation and almost $6 million from the philanthropy. If they kept the same per video
Jesus Christ.
Gates grant, it would be estimated Kurzgesagt received $7 million from their funds. This would be more money than Kurzgesagt received from their supporters on Patreon in the entire history of the channel. This made me realize that Kurzgesagt never was this small, independent, local, entirely viewer funding channel. As soon as the studio incorporated, billionaires began lining up. They transformed the small Munich-based design studio with 5 employees into a multi-billion-dollar media powerhouse with dozens of. Kurzgesagt was also sponsored by regular commercial businesses, Cheeseburger or Skillshare, but neither of these has multi-billion-dollar investment in global industries, and they aren't spending millions in political lobby trying to do lawmaking. And most importantly, they don't find the sources that Kurzgesagt uses for the piece. And what the hell is going on with Kurzgesagt? Kurzgesagt told us their research is impartial and scientific work, but my skepticism alarms were already crossed on the way. So I started looking at the uses and noticing the videos primarily simple this publication is frequently the website is laid up together this research publication sharing their art. It is our role to data.
Okay, I will say, probably shouldn't just be using one source for everything this frequently. That's I think it's a very fair point. I think you should probably get information from more than just one source. Especially because it's, again, I think this still is going to boil down to more of like, instead of it being causes, like more correlation as opposed to causation. But this certainly is just, at the very least, laziness to keep using the same source for all of this information. And that source also happens to be funded by your grant. That's not amazing.
Forced you to do what?
Rob people.
Resub God tier.
Made me wait on the roadside, calling for help.
Stop spreading this conspiracy bullshit. Well, it's not really a conspiracy. They haven't made any claims aside from like the factual stuff of they have the grants.
Let's get you home.
Which they openly talk about. It's at the end of the videos. And they also use one source a lot. What's the conspiracy? That's just factual. Theories of Cubone. The hated one channel is all about conspiracy. Could be, but so far he hasn't said anything conspiratorial. He's just pointing out things that I do think are a little stellar. This should be at the beginning of the video, or at the very least in the description. When a video is at least partially funded by an organization, I think that should be mentioned as opposed to the last 20 seconds for the sake of transparency and to play by the standard actual rules of sponsored stuff. I get that it's not technically a sponsor, but at the very least you should disclose it and make it clear to everyone.
Call them whatever.
I don't think that's good practice from them there. But right now, all he's doing is pointing out a lot of their funding comes from these grants and these VCs, and also using this one source, which is also funded by one of their investors. Funded by billionaires who needed the word for pro-billionaire propaganda. That's what I'm saying. And from what I've read, it boils down to the channel's very optimistic when it comes to the bleak topics, which they're painting as it sucking the dick of their investors, which again is an impression I never got when watching the content.
That was brave. Ronin are dangerous.
So I'm curious to see what argument he makes for that.
The fear of losing your child. I didn't think I'd ever see you again.
Grants and a paid sponsorship are very different. They're kind of different. I won't give you very different. At the end of the day, you got money from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Let's say you wanted to make a video, let's say this channel wanted to make a video on malaria, and they start talking about things that make the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation look bad. They probably wouldn't get to that. They probably wouldn't be favorable with this anymore. So they probably wouldn't talk about anything that makes them look bad. That's where there's a problem. Whether it's a sponsor, whether it's a grant, it still kind of makes it more hesitant to tackle something that might paint this in a bad light. It just becomes kind of a conflict of interest. You receive this money from this foundation, you're probably going to avoid any of the topics that make that foundation look bad. But it's all speculative at best. But you just keep moving the goalposts. It's not speculative to say that this money came from them, because they have openly stated that they did get grants, and this money was, or these videos were partially funded by the foundation and their grant. That's not speculative. What is speculative is whether or not it's pro-billionaire propaganda they're peddling. Which I have not been convinced on in the slightest yet.
At least $4.8 million at the Gates Foundation alone, but they were also funded by Ocean Knight, Petron, and William McCaskey. All of these entities and their series of sponsored videos and efforts to their partnership with Our World of Data was initiated and ran from the Gates Foundation the first video on overpopulation, made in collaboration with Max Rosen, the founder and lead scientist of Our World of Data. Following this money trail led me to discover that the data in criticized videos isn't such a rock-solid science as they authoritatively present in their videos. Many of the numbers from Our World of Data, Criticized relies on so much, are complete garbage. In the videos on overpopulation, they show this amazing decline in global poverty, a trend which they attribute to economic growth. But where is this data coming from? It's from Max Rosograph and Our World of Data. But look at how the data points go all the way back to the early 19th century. All these historical numbers are proven. Real data on poverty for the majority of the world didn't exist until 1981. Anything before that is a speculation. And who defines extreme poverty? The World Bank does. How? By calculating the lowest possible rate as an effort from poverty line to the poorest countries in the world. That's living below $1.09 a day. Scholars strongly disagree with this rate, suggest at least $7.40 a day. With the World Bank's rate, billions of people that are extremely poor according to their national poverty line end up in lower middle regions, which is what makes the graph look like this, instead of this if we use the $7.40 line, or this if we leave out China. So not a dramatic decline at all, but an increase actually, or a stagnation actually in 1991. There's also half of the world's population suffering from hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition, more than 40 million modern slaves, and the ever-widening income gap between the richest and the poor. So it would be hard to come to an optimistic conclusion that poverty is somehow under decline.
I just can't chalk that up to it necessarily being like propaganda. That could very well once again just be a more optimistic look at a very bleak subject.
This is a three-paths well.
And I've seen that video.
The gambler's den.
I just didn't get the impression that it was... It just feels like optimism equal propaganda. It's the prime skill there is of the... What does this have to do? The point he's making is the data they present paints a much prettier picture than the real data, because they're using the $1.90 a day model, which makes it look like it's declining, but that's not what a lot of people seem to agree on. Most people seem to agree that the 740 is the poverty line, and using that data, it's actually been increasing.
This goes.
So it's, right now it's being accused of trying to paint it as a declining thing when it's really not.
Appears abandoned.
That's the point they're making.
Hello?
The map is mine. Go away.
I am Jin Sakai.
But that just doesn't seem malicious.
And I'm Amatera, god of the sun. No.
Like, it just really seems like that's still a pretty fair metric overall, but it's a more optimistic look at it, but it doesn't seem like it's coming from a place of trying to be... It doesn't seem like it's coming from a place of just trying to suck up to the people that give them the money. False information, though, in general, it's not false. The information itself isn't wrong, but it's using a metric that not everyone agrees on. So it's using a different metric than what other people seem to prefer. But that doesn't mean it's false. It could be manipulative, though, to paint the narrative in a different way than the reality. But I still don't even know if I fully agree with that take on it either. I have to rewatch the video to see exactly what arguments are being made. Thanks to Reese of GB and the Prime Chaos. Another thing that I read, and we haven't gotten through the video, but in here he brings up a study from September of 2020 to critique a video that Kurtz, I will never get that name right, but to critique a video that they made back in June of 2020. So in September of 2020, new information came out that made the video published in June 2020 less accurate. And he holds that against them as if they were somehow supposed to predict the future. And I don't think that's necessarily a fair criticism. This is the Prime, JFK, and the Reset QP. Painting a different picture than reality is being optimistic as propaganda. Well, I'm not saying it's painting a different picture. That's the argument. Again, it's a metric that people are disagreeing on with the level. Is it $1.90 a day or $7.40? I guess depending on where you're going to get your information from or who you're going to talk to, they're going to give you something different. It just depends on where
Ronin put me up to this.
think that number should be. The information's not wrong,
Sanjo sent you.
but
We
they
want to
paint two
trade
very
the map
different
for
pictures
money.
depending on how you look at it. Tier 1 here.
Yes, my lord.
It's misleading to use that data. But based on what? Maybe it's misleading for the people saying 740. I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable enough on the topic. Maybe the $1.90 is actually the more accepted one, but 740 is something that the hated one cherry picked. We found a couple articles where people agree it should be 740.
But you'll run
We have no,
errands for
I
them.
have no way
Give
of
me the
knowing.
map
I'm not
now,
knowledgeable enough.
or I'll take it from you.
You can do this for
And
every
I heard
piece
you
of
had no sense
data
of humor.
ever.
You're outnumbered. You want the map? Pay us.
I won't ask.
Because I could also say, I think the poverty line is anything under $15 a day. And then this would paint an entirely different graph. I don't know what the right metric is.
The map must be on one of these three. Here it is.
But it is a conclusion touted by Bill Gates, who also paid for this video.
As the economist Matt Grozer said, the world has done quite well on this. The newspapers could run a headline.
The lives of the poor will improve more in the next 15 years than in any other time in history.
Number of people in poverty fell by 137,000 since yesterday.
Comes out as what for many people will be a stunningly positive story.
Many videos made in partnership with Our World in Data can be dissected like this. Look at the numbers on historical emissions from this video on who is responsible for climate change. Where are these numbers coming from? Our World in Data, of course. But there's just one source that conveniently downplays the role of the developed countries in climate change.
I have your
According
map.
to a paper from Lancet,
I
funded
hope
by
it wasn't too much trouble.
the U.S. is responsible
Not to feed the
for
people of
25%
Teutama.
emissions, but 40%
Which is what you'll do. Isn't that right, Lady Senjo?
I told you. This is my home. And
Is this the one that came out in September of
they are
2020?
starving. I can feed them, and so I will.
Then I'll leave you to it.
Because this is the one I might have just been talking about.
Thank
yeah.
you,
So this
Lord
okay.
Sakai.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. So this paper came out in September 2020. The video he's critiquing with this information came out in June of 2020. They wouldn't have had this information available to them to make this topic, or to include in this topic. There would have been no way. So this, like, maybe now, if they had made this video, you know, after this came out, that video would have turned out very differently. We have no way of knowing. But they had no way of being able to incorporate this information. It's not like they maliciously left it out and ignored it. They just didn't have it. I'll double check, but let's see. Which video was this one? This one was the emissions video, right? What's the name of it? Does he show it? You know, how I just look it up. No. Who's responsible for climate change? Yep, June 21st, 2020. The paper that he is now referring to came out in September of that year. They just didn't have the information available. They didn't just ignore it and leave it out on purpose. It didn't exist at the time, or at least not publicly. Maybe if they were funded more heavily by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they could have peered into the future and gotten a hold of this paper before it went live. But yeah, when this video came out, they did not have it. That's why none of that information is there. They wouldn't have used it anyways since they always use the same source. Again, that's speculative though, which, oh, you don't think I know who's talking about speculative for the last couple of points. That is speculative. Maybe they wouldn't have used it, maybe they would. We have no way of knowing for sure. The thing is, this video came out before this. It's not what, they didn't just leave this out, they didn't maliciously omit this information, it didn't exist. Maybe they wouldn't have used it? Couldn't tell you. No one can.
The developed countries in climate change. According to a paper from Lancet, funded by no one, the US is responsible not for 25% of emissions, but 40%. The EU is responsible for 29% instead of 22%. G8 emitted 85% of the total CO2, and the global north is accountable for 92% of excess carbon in the atmosphere. These numbers draw a much less integral share of responsibility than Kurzgesagt. And as I was analyzing more and more videos, I actually discovered a lot I did not expect to find. In exploring separate videos on climate change, Kurzgesagt briefly mentioned seemingly random selection of innovations.
For a new generation of nuclear power plants, new batteries, electronics, and steel, low-carbon production of cement, artificial meat, carbon capture, direct air capture, and carbon capture.
There doesn't seem to be any objective merit as to why I mentioned these in particular, but they do have in common two things. Bill Gates has invested millions into startups developing low-carbon steel batteries and producing nuclear energy and carbon capture.
Wait, why is alternative meat thrown in here? Everyone is invested in alternative meat. It was one of the biggest fucking Silicon Valley investments for everyone. I have a fucking friend who invested in Impossible Foods back in, like, Jesus Christ, like 2013. Like, that's, I don't think that one's necessarily on the same level as the other shit where there's some kind of ulterior motive, perhaps, that you could digest. Everyone invested in alternative meat. Where's that headline? It doesn't matter. I guess I don't need to see the headline. Yes, the fuck it is. What is the ulterior motive of lab-grown meat? Is Bill Gates putting microchips in our meat? I can see why talking about like all the other stuff. I can see why that would be something pertinent. I understand where that line of thinking is going to go. But the lab-grown meat, this is just something that legitimately everyone invested in that had money back in like 2012, 2013 when this became a huge fad. That's why they push vegan shit. Oh my god, who is in the chat right now? They push vegan shit because Bill Gates invested in lab-grown meat? What the fuck? What are you... Everyone that had money back in when this started popping off as investment opportunities put money into this. Bill Gates. Like I said, I know a guy who fucking put money into this. These companies got so much investment, and I'll tell you one thing, the guy who put money into it is not smart enough to be putting any kind of fucking microchips in there. The ulterior motive there was make money, because this was going to be a huge thing. Also, I think lab-grown meat has a ton of potential. Like, as a concept, I actually think that shit is so hype. The current agricultural industry is so fucking bad for everything and everyone. I hope lab-grown meat pops off. Why are you defending them so much? Feels like you're biased. It's crazy how I've already pointed out a couple things that I find very suspicious about the way they handle, such as like the sponsors and using one source that's also funded by their grant. And yet somehow, because now I'm not agreeing with every single thing, I'm just supporting. I hate this mentality. It's the same thing with any kind of political opinion. If you're not 100% on that team, you must hate it. You're against them. Why can't people just take information and point out things that are wrong or right? Both. The Mummy is my favorite movie. I can point out a million fucking flaws. I still love that movie. You don't have to blindly support and digest and eat, consume everything and just assume it's all correct because you play for that team or you subscribe to that belief. You can call out and criticize things that don't make sense. It's not illegal. It's healthy. There are a couple things this channel has done that has been pointed out I didn't know that I do find a bit odd and I don't think is handled correctly. But then there's a couple things this video is mentioning that are just wrong, such as the emissions thing. Their emissions video was made in June 21st of 2020. The paper that this video cites as the contradictory evidence that proves some of these numbers are incorrect didn't come out until, what the fuck was it? September of 2020. So the information wasn't there. They didn't just ignore it, it just wasn't fucking there. They couldn't predict the future, so it's a bad point. No matter how you spin it, it's a bad point. That information was not available to them. They couldn't have cited it. It's just that simple. They could have retracted it. Maybe they should have. I'd have to rewatch this video. But if I recall correctly, the end of this video still does call out corporations and the countries as being the main culprits of emissions and the main drivers of the problems with the climate. So the overall message is still accurate regardless of the numbers, but maybe it is so egregious they should have retracted it. That's a fair argument. I can agree with you there. I'd have to rewatch it.
I thought you were in Yarikawa.
I can't go back yet.
Who did this?
Mongol warlord, Altan. I heard stories coming out of Otsuna. He's terrorizing everyone, stealing food, medicine, slaughtering families.
None of these technologies
Anyone fights back or tries to run,
they get butchered.
The innovations lack robust scientific backing.
An old friend of mine runs a field down the road.
Many videos and topics that align with
You'll find your friend.
Zach's billionaire
Put an end to this
are
war.
frequently sprinkled with messaging about how investment in innovations will solve a problem or make the world a better place.
By investing in these things right now, investment and aid and fair investment is investment, massive investment, and investment pause.
It's an option.
Ian's this way.
Who's your friend?
Her name's Ichi. I've known her since I was a child. Taught me how to survive.
Have you seen her since the invasion?
No, I haven't seen her in years.
Again, I don't feel like there's anything wrong with just mentioning innovation.
We should scout the inn.
The action to invest in these things, obviously that's a problem. But just mentioning things that are innovating in the fields to hopefully make it better is once again just optimism. Optimism does not just inherently equal propaganda. Because, I mean, Jesus Christ, everything gets innovated. AI technology came out of nowhere and it's changing the whole fucking game. I don't think there's anything wrong with mentioning innovative things that are in that ballpark that you're talking about.
You shouldn't be here.
In order
If
to
they
make
see me,
his
we're looking for
injection
Ichi.
work,
She runs this inn.
Have
you seen her?
Chris Zack pulled the numbers in concentration dates on the magazine, who took the numbers from the private carbon capture facility. But that's still low in this. The reality is we and still at least are right now. Carbon capture will be going up or be real until at least the next decade. Rather than solving the climate crisis, science argues that inventing the first way and delay phasing out of modern industrial methods. Chris Zack doesn't tell you which technologies Bill Gates is invested in and how positive messaging about them is advancing his positions. But Chris Zack did take the effort to mention exactly those technologies that Bill Gates and his billionaire friends are most invested in. There is a pattern that can explain why Chris Zack videos are like this. In many videos,
Ichi,
they point
you're
to
alive.
Bill Gates' interests,
Why are you
elaborate
here?
our role in data,
I came to
prioritize
save you.
their content.
You've killed me, Yuna.
In their video on
I was keeping the invaders drunk and distracted. But when Al-Dan hears about this, about what you've done...
This video is not sponsored by Gates, but the billionaire is betting heavily on his new generation of nuclear reactors. Chris Zack's source document links to our world in data 27 times, or about every third reference. Chris Zack made videos heavily criticizing...
Which is something I do think is lazy, at the very least. Even if not malicious, it's beyond lazy to only use one source for the information, especially when there's something like that. So I think that point is fair, and especially because that is just... I think that's just not a good look if you do receive money from the grant that also funds that. At the very least, use other sources to corroborate the information. I think that's a very clear, obvious thing. Even if not malicious, it's lazy. I don't know if it's malicious or they're just using that because it's convenient, but still, just use more than just that main source.
Food. This is another topic of major investment from Gates, who thinks industrialized agriculture with pesticides and GMOs is the best approach to solving world hunger, which it hasn't solved so far. In all 4 cases where Chris Zack draws a verdict on organic food, our world data is cited as a reference. This video is also not sponsored by Gates. The most generous billionaire is one of the earliest backers of alternative meat, owning major positions
this is becoming like a big part of the video.
protein companies. Chris Zack has made a series of videos on meat, all with a strong verdict on how meat is bad for you and the environment. All of these videos were advised on by Hannah Ritchie, one of the key lieutenants at Our World in Data, during the production of it.
sometimes meat is unhealthy, but we don't care. Breaking news for you. Nutritional science is such a fickle and ever-changing thing. Whatever is accepted as truth last year is probably outdated by this year. I studied so much nutrition in college and fucking all of it's worthless now. The main takeaway is no one fully understands what effect the nutrition has on the human body. It is constantly evolving. There are some things that stay consistent, but on the whole, it's constantly changing. One thing that doesn't change, though, is the current agricultural industry is just in a bad spot. Just in a genuinely bad spot. So I don't know